guys, Deanna Cat here. So it is the first weekend of spring and we are going to plant out our seed potatoes today. So I thought I would just share with you our process of how we like to grow potatoes. There's multiple different varieties and methods of growing potatoes. Some people like to grow them in raised beds or straight in the ground in hills and mounds. Some folks use like metal cylinder like cages and layer straw and soil in those to grow them. We prefer just to grow them in grow bags, and so we have, this is a 20-gallon grow bag here, and we use anywhere from 15, 20, I think we even have a 25, but so we like to do them in these containers, and I will show you kind of our process. Potatoes in general are one of my favorite things to grow, I think partly because it's so fun to harvest them. So that's one of the nice things about putting them in a bag like this, is that when it's time to harvest, we can just take this bag and dump it into a wheelbarrow and then sift through the soil and pick out all the potatoes and toss them in a bowl. And it's kind of like a little treasure hunt, and it's really fun and rewarding. One of the other great things about starting growing potatoes at home is that you get to experience so many different varieties, just like anything that you grow from your, for yourself. There's a lot more varieties available out there from seed than there are in the grocery store. So you get to pick and choose a bunch of fun varieties, like we have some really crazy purple looking ones going on here today. So I will tell you a little bit more about the seed that we have here in a moment, because I'm going to change and change the view around and actually show you more of a close-up while I'm planting them. So I'll talk about the seeds themselves in a moment. But first, I just want to talk about some of the general preferred conditions for growing potatoes. So a couple things. A is that they do like acidified soil. So you can see over here, we actually have a bag of this acid planting mix from Gardener and Bloom. If you can't find this, unfortunately, it's only on the West Coast, I think. But their Kellogg line has a Shade Lovers mix, I think is what it's called. And that's their same version of their Kellogg line. But it's acidified already for you. And we found this several years ago and really, really liked that product to use to grow potatoes, because again, they like acidified soil. So most bag soils or regular garden soil is somewhere closer to neutral. A neutral pH is about 7. And so regular bag soil is like 6.5 to 7-ish. It might be slightly acidic, but not quite as acidic as potatoes like. Potatoes like anywhere from about 4.8 to 5.5. So a full 0.0 to 2 points more acidic than your traditional soils. And the other alternative, if you can't find an acid lover soil mix, is that you can use horticultural sulfur to acidify your soil. The only kind of tricky thing with that is that it's usually a slow release product, the sulfur is, and so you have to think in advance. And so that was one of the reasons we really loved finding this acid lovers mix, was that sometimes we'd be like, oh shoot, it's time to plant potatoes, and we didn't acidify our soil yet. And so you can use that though, the horticultural sulfur, just mix it per the instructions on the bag. The other kind of tricky thing there is you'll need to probably get a pH meter, or at least just estimate what you think your pH might be, shoot for neutral, because the package will generally say, add this amount to lower it however many points. So you have to be able to know what your starting point is to get to your ending point. So acidified soil is one of the things that they enjoy. Another thing is really rich soil with a lot of organic matter, so compost, but not high nitrogen compost. Too much nitrogen, like a high nitrogen fertilizer, will actually give them really, really tall greens, and they'll be like, ooh, look how healthy these are, but they probably won't develop as big of tubers or big as potatoes. So rich soil, well draining soil. They don't want to be soggy, so these have the tendency to rot if it's too soggy. So that's one of the other things we really like about a container like this, is it breathes really well. Some folks use a trash can to grow their potatoes, and you could do that, but just make sure you have plenty of drainage holes and you don't overwater, and that you have really fluffy soil, because they will rot if they're overly wet. So well draining soil, rich soil. They like consistent moisture, even though they don't like to be soggy. So it's one of those perfect balance kind of situations. So what we're going to end up using is we're going to use mostly this acid planting mix, but we also have some leftover mix that we grew our potatoes in last year in a grow bag. And so we're going to pull some of that out and mix it in with this as well, because it has sat over the winter and there were worms in the grow bag. So the worms have continued to aerate and nourish that soil. And it's kind of like now a compost product, because we did add compost last year when we were growing our potatoes to that bag as well. So rich, well-draining soil, and other preferences they have is full sun if possible. and also to not have too much of a temperature extreme. So you can first start planting out potatoes once the soil warms over about 40 degrees, and then it's best in like a moderate temperature though, where if you have something around 60 to 80 degrees, that's like the perfect ideal potato growing conditions. If you live in a hotter climate, you might have to try to find a kind of cooler place to keep them out of the hottest afternoon sun, or something like that. And so that's when, for folks with really hot summers, you might have to try to do these a little bit earlier, like an early spring crop or a later fall crop where you're avoiding that middle hottest heat in the middle of the summer. And so I think that covers most of the ideal conditions that these guys need. And so we'll go ahead and start getting them actually planted, and we'll see you there in a second. Okay, so here are all of our seed potatoes. So in previous years, we've gotten seed potatoes from all sorts of different suppliers online. This year we got them from Seeds Now. We've gotten them from Peaceful Valley in the past and a whole bunch of different places. And I forgot to mention too throughout all of this that this goes with a written blog post, and so I will write up more details, include, you know, more details about where to buy the seed potatoes, and obviously, you know, jot down all the notes for you that I'm talking about in this video and anything that I forget to say. But anyways, you can tell just how sprouted these guys are, and they're really ready to be planted. And this is actually ideal. So even though it looks a little bit gnarly and crazy, this is totally a potato that is ready to be planted and grow many more potatoes from one tuber. So once you plant this, the greens are going to grow up, and that is what's going to come up out of the soil, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. And produce many tubers all along the way, or many more potatoes all along the way of the shoots that they end up growing. If you don't buy actual seed potatoes from a seed vendor or seller, you can try to use organic potatoes from the grocery store, but make sure to get organic. And when you're doing that, you want to look for ones that have plenty of little eyes. So like every little eye on a potato is what forms a sprout. So you can tell some of them didn't have very many eyes. Like this big old seed only has this one sprout going. Maybe it'll sprout elsewhere. There's a few other eyes that haven't sprouted yet. So once it's in the ground and wet, maybe it'll sprout a little bit more. But that process of sprouting potatoes is called chitting. So all of these have chitted now by just sitting out in the light, so you don't have to keep them in the dark, because we're not going to be eating these anyways like this, out in one of our spare rooms on this tray in the sun, and they're getting pre-sprouted. And so that's ideal. They don't have to be completely pre-sprouted before you plant them, but it is a good helpful idea and an indicator that they are going to actually sprout, especially if you're starting with grocery store potatoes. And always get organic, because the inorganic ones might be treated with something that inhibits them from sprouting. So that's chitting of the seeds. These are our seed potatoes. One other thing I wanted to mention is you could actually cut them up into smaller pieces if you wanted to. All of these guys and these guys are all pretty small, but maybe if you had potatoes like as big as these ones, you could cut them into multiple sections, and then you get multiple seed potatoes out of them, which could be great. But they need to have at least a couple eyes each to do that. So if we wanted to, we could have cut like this one, and we would have cut it just in half here, and then this eye would grow a sprout and this eye would grow a sprout. So this would have turned into two. We just didn't think about it in time, and the thing is you have to do it in advance, because that cut needs to be allowed to dry and kind of like scab over, because you want to cut them at least several days, and let them dry for several days before they get planted. Now Figaro's going to start crying. And so, because otherwise if it's left open, like an open wound, and then you plant it, there's a risk of them rotting. So that is chitting and cutting and preparing your seed potato, and then we will go ahead and get them planted, or we'll at least pick which one we'll plant. I think I might plant these fun red ones, because they look most ready and needy to get into the ground. So let's plant these red potatoes. They are just a red thumb fingerling. Chicks. Okay, so Erin went and grabbed our older bag of soil that we used last year for growing potatoes. So I just wanted to show you our soil here so you can see how nice and rich and fluffy this is. So this is that same acid lovers mix, but then we just added some worm castings, had worms in there, and then it sat over the winter and really broke down into basically its own nice, really nice compost. So we're going to use some of this in with our new stuff, but not entirely that. And you might be wondering, well, why don't you just plant potatoes back into that full bag of soil there instead of transferring into a new container? And we will actually use that bag once we reduce some of the soil that's in there, because when we plant potatoes, we actually want to not fully fill this container, and we want to plant them closer to the bottom, because as they grow, we're going to continue to add soil throughout the season. So let me explain, and I'll show you this new bag of soil here too. So here's this soil. You can tell that the bag is probably only about 1/3 full here. So if I dig down here, there's still several inches. I'd say probably at least 5-ish inches, maybe 6 inches of soil. We're going to plant the seed potato at least 3 inches deep, almost close to the bottom, but not completely. I might add a little bit more soil to this bag actually. Because once they start to grow, they're going to shoot up their green stalks. And once they get pretty tall, so I would say at least, you know, at least a minimum of 6 inches over the soil line. So say we've got green sprouts growing up. Then we can come back and we're going to actually add more soil and some compost, and maybe even layer in some straw, depending on if it seems like it's getting compact or not, because again, we want to have nice drainage. So a lot of people do like lasagna layers of straw and compost and soil up the stalks as they grow. And the purpose of that is that actually the stem of the potato that's growing will shoot off more potatoes and tubers from its stem. So if you start them low and then keep bearing them and bearing them, bearing them throughout the growing season, so maybe for the first month as they're actively growing, until you reach the top of the container, you're going to get that many more potatoes than if we would have just put potatoes kind of in the middle here and then hoped that they emerged and grew around their stalks. So getting into actually planting them. So I'm going to grab these guys. I'll probably put all of these in this container because again, this is a pretty big grow bag here. So first I just kind of lay them out to get about the spacing. I do about 4 inches apart. So I kind of set them in to get an idea of where I want them to be. And I might crowd them a little bit too much sometimes, but you know what? That's okay. They're not that crowded. So bear with me while I grab a few more. And I've got a couple little tiny stragglers there, but just kind of setting them in here and get this last one in here. And I keep them away from the very, very edge just because the edge is a little bit more likely to dry out. And then, so they're in there, they're about 3-4 inches apart. And then I'm just going to kind of, if you can see, work them down under, and that's okay if that sprout actually sticks up a little bit because you can tell the actual tuber is down there, not on the bottom of the bag. I can still feel a good couple inches of soil underneath it, and then I'm going to go ahead and cover it up and then just repeat the process to get them down there a few inches. And again, we'll probably top off just a little bit more soil on this too. Get them down in there, and the cats are running around inside like crazy doing something, and get them down in. And that's that. And so we're just going to get all of these buried, give them a good water, stick them somewhere with full sun, and then give them some time to grow. And I already talked about how we bury them when they are growing. And we're going to aim for that nice, consistent, even moisture. If you're in a place where it rains a lot in the summer, you'll definitely want to do the straw layering like I mentioned. So straw and compost and soil layered, because with all that rain, you might not be able to control, you know, how dry and how wet they are if it's raining. Whereas we can just cut back on the water if they're becoming too wet. And then, so I might actually roll these down. So that's another thing that we do. I can feel a mosquito on my back. Oh, sorry. Oh, I think he got me pretty good too. We will roll these down it's hard to do with one hand, but I'll go all the way around the bag and I roll down the sides while they're first starting to grow, because then as soon as the sprouts come up, then they have sun. So that's one nice thing about using these fabric bags too, is we'll roll them all down for the first, you know, few weeks, month, and then as they grow and as we fill in more soil, then we can unroll the bags and then add the extra soil on top. And then when to harvest potatoes. I will try to find some pictures to add to this blog post so you can actually see. But as the greens come up, they should stay green and nice and full foliage for a couple months at least, and then they'll start to die back. And that's completely normal once they start to yellow and die back and get really thin. Wait until the greens have completely died back, at least about 2 to 3 weeks after that point, then you can harvest your tubers. And what they're doing at that point is as the green dies, it's sucking back in all of its last bits of nutrients into the tuber. So they actually are still growing at that stage. They're still maturing. They're getting all their final nutrients. And then that's the time to harvest them. And then in these bags, like I said, you can just dump them into a wheelbarrow and it's super fun and easy. Homegrown potatoes are some of the best tasting potatoes too, I have to tell you. Even though Aaron used to make fun of me for wanting to grow potatoes because it's like they're so cheap at the grocery store, why not just buy organic potatoes at the grocery store? But nothing beats the taste of an earthy, creamy, homegrown potato. So I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I hope it was helpful. And as I said, tune in to the blog post for more details, because I'm sure I forgot to say something. And I'll post pictures of all the different various stages that I explained today too, which will definitely help tie it all together for you. So have a good evening, and it is our Friday. Actually, it's everybody's Friday today. So we're gonna go and hang out with the birds. Hubbard birds. Are you out here making messes? Always.